So I would say, if anything, our pastor should be pitching higher and faster. The people will appreciate that because they don't want to be infantilized. They don't want the soft Jesus. They want the real Jesus. They want the absolute truth. Don't sugarcoat things. Tell them exactly what it is. The most important thing is that we've got to be honest about the cause of the loss of membership and attendance, which has to be rooted in a rejection of scriptural authority and the truth of what the Bible says. So if we are saying that Genesis 1:28, be fruitful and multiply, only applies to animals and Old Testament people, then we are falsely teaching the people. And I think what we see with this reduction is, if you look at the cohorts or the generational cohorts, this collapse is a direct consequence of what the people were taught in the 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm. So we talk about Seminex being a victory for the Battle of the Bible and that the LCMS won that. But it was too late, because we'd catechized all those people who had children through the 80s and 90s in a way that told them the Bible was not the truth. So they believed it, and they stopped having children, and then their kids stopped going to church.
Welcome back to On the Line. We've got just a quick update on Lit for you. We've actually just finished recording our 5th course with Dr. Joel Bierman on virtue and ethics. Fantastic course. We're very excited to have these 5 courses finished. But the updates for you are, we're tentatively looking at August 4th for our release. Everything's looking good. That will be completed by that date. And we've also had a number of churches that have already signed up for the Lutheran Institute of Theology. If that's something that you are interested in learning more about, we've got professional packets available for you. You can either go to our website, and there's a pop-up there, and you can enter your email address there, or you can go to the description below, find my email address, bryan.stecker@ontheline.net. Just send me an email, and I can give you all of that information so that you can begin those conversations. So we appreciate your support, and we're excited for launch, but enjoy the episode.
Some of those reservations are in tough condition.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then you see the people lining up for the Indian Health Service clinics. Mm-hmm. It's terrible. Yeah. If anyone wants single-payer healthcare, go to one of the reservations and see if you like it. Yeah. Because they've got it.
Would you ever move out of Colorado?
I think we're going to have to.
Just
it's deteriorating so badly.
Yeah.
Socially and politically. So whatever California does, Colorado says, hold my beer. And they're just trying to out-extreme San Francisco. So the homeless problem, the deterioration in the schools. You take your bike along the bike paths, which just in the last 5 years, you're at serious risk. Do not fall, because you're going to get poked with a needle, which is not filled with good and happy things.
Yeah.
You're going to get all the hepatitises in one go. These are dangerous people out there. And it's a difference between the youngsters who want to be homeless and enjoy that lifestyle, and they actually have kind of a uniform, an aesthetic that they pursue. And then you've got the ones who the meth has taken such a toll that they're so brain damaged that they'll never be rehabilitated. Look, I think the evidence is in. Nobody can be rehabilitated from an opioid addiction.
Yeah.
I think you can have bouts of sobriety, but I've never seen a case where alcohol, yes, they seem to be able to get off the wagon for a long time. But the opioids, man, it's just an endless cycle of rehab, relapse, go to the bottom, and if you don't OD, then you're back in rehab and the cycle starts again.
They say that there's I think it was some kind of psychologist or whatever, but it was talking about how when your body, just the first time you have meth, at that point it's so potent that there's a main part of you that is just, that's the goal for the rest of the life. Like, how do I find that again? Yeah. So you can be doing other things, but like as soon as there's any type of trigger, like that awakens and it sends you on a quest to try to find meth.
Yeah. And it's tragic because during COVID, then a lot of the resources that were used to try and help these people fight those temptations were withdrawn. So then the OD rate skyrocketed. And we lost thousands of people, tens of thousands, to unnecessary ODs because they shut the facilities that could help them.
Mm-hmm. Do you think a lot of it is, if we can control the fentanyl inflows into the U.S., do you think that will solve some of these issues?
It's certainly going to help, right? Because the fentanyl is cheap. It's a quick and an easy hit. It's ubiquitous. It's in everything. It's cut into every product. From what I hear, people are still chasing cocaine as the best thing, but it's more expensive. So fentanyl's a great substitute. And they could cut those flows 100%. So part of the tariff fight with Canada and Mexico is Canada is working with the Chinese, kind of turning a blind eye to all the precursor chemicals that are being smuggled in through Port of Montreal with the cooperation of the Hells Angels, and Vancouver with the Chinese triads, then working with the cartels. So it's pouring in from both sides of the border. And that's how we're a serious country when you are essentially blasé about losing 100,000 people a year to drug ODs.
Mm-hmm.
What is causing them to want to take these substances in the first place? So what are the causes of despair? And nobody wants to address it. It's a very strange, I think, a spiritual phenomenon where we've abandoned a certain class of people and we've said, we don't care that you have no hope. Why don't you take even more fentanyl and kill yourself so that we don't have your unfunded liabilities burdening down our Medicare, Medicaid, and the resources?
Mm-hmm. Well, we talked about this with John Davidson. In his book, he highlights the push for assisted suicide in Canada.
Yeah.
And how it's taken root in Japan, too. And he was mentioning a Harvard professor, or he mentions this in his book, who's very prestigious. He has a massive following. He's from Japan, so a lot of his following is from Japan. And he's advocating that if you love your country, what you do at a certain age, if you really want to help your grandchildren, is that you do the assisted suicide route, right? So that you don't become a financial burden on that next generation. So those ideas are being talked about at high levels in academic institutions, obviously in the political realm, openly in Canada. And so you can make that connection and say, well, if those philosophies and ideas are being purchased, then that would make sense why you'd be okay with these inflows.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got such a massive unfunded liability. So we've made promises to all these future generations that we're going to pay your Social Security, and we're going to pay your Medicare, and we're going to pay your Medicaid. And we've got all these other programs, SNAP, EBT, you name it. Well, we're about $200 trillion unfunded on those programs if you take it out, let's say, 70 to 100 years.
Wow.
So if you're the state, you're just taking a rational economic perspective on this, and you have to say, how do we get rid of those liabilities? Well, COVID's kind of handy. If you take a 20-year-old who has COVID and you put him into a nursing home, which seems to be what happened, especially in New Jersey, New York, Michigan. Well, you've just cleaned up a lot of your unfunded liabilities, right? So in a sense, they've learned how to taper the Ponzi, because it's a Ponzi scheme where you've made all these promises that you will never be able to fulfill. So how do you get out of this? You can inflate your way out of it. you can't really tax your way out of it because you're going to generate a rebellion. But if you kill them, no problem. And people say, but then you're killing your labor force. But we're not, because we're importing substitute labor by the millions.
Who do not have rights to those same stockpiles of promises.
It doesn't matter because you've got the solution. You will kill them eventually as well. So you make the population sick. So what you don't want, if you're leading this system, you do not want lots of 90-year-olds because that will bankrupt the system. Because it's a tiny percentage of the population that can actually afford its own high-quality medical care, that can take care of itself through to old age, to the point of death, to die with dignity. Everyone else is kind of dependent on the state. So if you're in that position, you don't want people to live too much past their date of retirement. So there's kind of an optimum point on the curve where they are productive, but they're becoming less productive and they're starting to consume resources that you could allocate to fighting a war in Ukraine, that you could spend on USAID to promote abortion in Uganda. So there's competition for these resources.
Have these things been tried? So like Soviet Russia, for instance, were these philosophies part of what led to what we see with the gulags and, some of the mass death camps that they had?
I think that was more a good analogy is South Africa. So apartheid was based really on raw oppression and power, right? So the white minority said to the black majority, this is what's going to happen. And it was imposed by police rule. When apartheid ended, notionally, apartheid didn't end. All the racial classifications remain identical. And there are still all the race laws on the book. But what the new government did is they got smart and they made it economic. So instead of using raw state power to say, this is where you will live, or this is what job you can have, they said, well, if you have any interaction with the state, your company has to have a certain percentage of equity that is given to someone with a black skin. And they inverted the pyramid. So it used to be ranked whites, coloreds, Indians, blacks. And it's now completely inverted. So the racial preferences are now in that descending order. And they just applied it in a different way. So, it doesn't have that headline grabbing, coercive appearance. So Russia was more like that earlier version. And the gulags were really just to completely subdue the population, right? So you take out all your intellectuals and anyone who shows the slightest bit of dissent, you send them out to Siberia and you work them almost to death. And you really break them as much as possible so that if they don't die, once they come back into society, it's almost impossible for them to reintegrate. And you just smash that entire system. You destroy the churches, you destroy the family, and you're just left with this raw state power that gets to be God within its own territory.
Why was the Christian church in the crosshairs there in Russia? Because that was a huge part of it, right? I mean, the persecution of Christians was on the forefront of what was happening. Is that correct?
Correct. Now, we need to look at the composition of the Bolsheviks. So there was a high degree of racial animus. The Bolsheviks were dominated by ethnic Jews. So not religious Jews in the sense that we might understand them today. But with the history of the pogroms, there's a whole history to go through there as well. But in a sense, what happened with the Bolshevik Revolution was a point of racial and religious revenge against ethnic Russians, but especially Orthodox Russians. in order to really break that, which they succeeded in doing.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Are we live, by the way, Bennett? We are live. Did you catch the hold my beer comment? Okay, nice. All right. Well, I do kind of want to circle back to some of that here, perhaps towards the end, and explore that more. Particularly, sure. I have no idea if that connects at all with some of your reasons for moving from South Africa, 8,000 miles away from family, and then moving here to the U.S. So we can circle back.
Yeah,
to that.
It absolutely does.
Yeah. So Tim Scott, thanks for coming on, or Tim Wood. Sorry.
That's right.
So yeah, we've got a lot of things to talk about. One of the things you just published with Ad Crucem just recently was a very fascinating article, and that's what first led to our connection. And it had to do with the demographic layout of the Lutheran Church, kind of mapping out different trends and such. So I want to start there and just to kind of get a picture of that, because I think that's very interesting to get to the landscape, and that can lead to some solutions that maybe are worth exploring to kind of remedy what some of the numbers are showing. So if you want to just kind of walk us through how to understand the demographic landscape that we're looking at today.
Right. So we published that article on our Substack, and it's called "Must the LCMS Accept Its Orderly Extinction?" And it's a very deliberate title because, in a sense, you can have a disorderly unwinding where people don't really understand what's going on, and all of a sudden you don't have a church body left. Mm-hmm. But we seem to be in this slow motion collapse where there has been a catastrophic reduction in weekly attendance. So we went from 1.1 million average weekly worshippers as recently as 2000. And we are now down to, my estimate is 420,000 a week.
And that's in 25 years.
2023, yeah. So in 23 years. So we're probably even lower at this point once we get this year's data in. So a quarter of a century, we have lost over half our weekly attendance. And you hear this spoken about, but there's not alarm. To me, that the change between 2000 and 2010 triggered some sort of flywheel that set this collapse in motion. So between 2000 and 2010, as this unwinding started to progress, the Synod should have said, we have got a huge crisis on our hands that is going to unfold. And it's not just a demographic crisis related to the boomers. Something happened that has caused us to lose effectively half our membership. People talk about baptized membership at their churches. It's largely irrelevant. It's your weekly attendees, and then of those weekly attendees, probably somewhere between 60 to 70% only are your core members who are really faithful, and maybe only 30% of them are actually contributing the funds that hold up the whole structure. So if you've got this continual margin compression, that is going to have catastrophic effects going forward. So we've got this reduction in attendance. There's been a reduction in membership as well, but it's been masked because we do such a poor job of record keeping. So I've seen this in 2 churches where I was in leadership, lay leadership. The record keeping is very poor. So you've got some people who have been transferred, but nobody has addressed it in the prior church's database. So you've got people who could be counted 4 or 5 times, right? Same person. So you're overstating your membership, you're overstating your weekly attendance. Now, eventually some of that gets cleaned up, but there is a persistent lag effect and a persistent overlap in the membership. So we're a lot lower than what the headline numbers say.
So the number you put forward, somewhere in the 400,000, 460,000 or something, is that's your estimation bringing in some of those metrics?
So I just took the 2023 published weekly average from all the data that the churches submit, which was 522,000. And I gave it a 20% haircut as a reasonable, I think probably undercounting the actual impact of those overlaps and the lags and the double counting. So that's where we get to probably by 23, we're only at maybe 450,000 actual weekly attendees.
Ben, can you pull up that article? Because I know there's some graphs in there. It might be helpful to. So it's
sure.
What's the article called? So it's Ad Crucem, CRUCEM.
.news.
And then what was the article called?
The article is called "Must the LCMS Accept Its Orderly Extinction?"
Okay. Yeah.
And while he's pulling that up, the thing that really jumped out at me is that we increased the number of pastors by 5% between 2014 and 2023.
Yeah, can you tell me more about that? Because that was a staggering number.
That
right?
is staggering.
Because the narrative has been much the opposite, right? And I know there's some trajectory aspects where there's a lot that are going to be retiring, but I don't think anyone, if you just ask them, anyone that's just mildly connected and said, "Do we have more pastors than we did, a decade ago?"
That is the overarching narrative throughout the synod: is that there is a massive pastor shortage, and we need more pastors at all costs. Seems to be the push from all sides. Well, it's just not the fact. The load per pastor has halved. So we should have seen a commensurate decline in the number of pastors.
Mm-hmm.
It cannot be healthy for us to have one pastor for every 94 people when it used to be one pastor for almost every 400.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something wrong there. And the problem with that is, as you've got this compression in membership and attendance, you are losing contributions to the church. So you have fewer contributions having to support the same number of pastors. Well, the system is then going to ration what happens. So what we end up doing is we pay the pastors much less than they're worth, because there just aren't the funds to do it. And where the apparent pastor shortage shows up is that you've got these impecunious congregations who cannot put enough money together to pay a pastor to live on, never mind to have a decent-sized family and to live well. So, that's kind of the headline, is you hear this pressure, well, we got 500 churches without a pastor. And notionally, that's true. But what does it actually mean when your attendance has compressed that much? So where are these pastor shortages occurring? And we see a lot of it in the rural areas. And a lot of it is a function that those churches were established a long time ago, when the basis of church formation was, how long does it take to go from the farm to a church by wagon on a Sunday? Well, we now drive to church by car on highways. So you've got too many congregations that are too close together. You've had depopulation from the rural areas. So these are what all these compounding negative effects are. And then at the same time, you've got the urban congregations that are aggregating members and becoming much larger. So the nature of everything has changed. So, ostensibly at the headline level, there is a shortage of pastors. But when you really dig into the data, one pastor for every 94 compared with 1 to 425 years ago, that's the problem.
And is that number membership or attendance? So is that one pastor for 94 attendees?
That's attendance.
That's attendance. Okay.
Right. So that's the pastor really serving those people who are wanting to get a shut-in visit, who want to have a Christian funeral, who want to have a Christian baptism for their children. So the workload of the pastors has actually come off dramatically. And that's something we don't acknowledge. So there are all these dilution factors that we do need to address. Instead of just saying we've got a pastor shortage, throwing more men at the job is not going to fix the underlying problem. We have too few Christians in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And we're going to have to at some point be very, I think, almost confrontational to say we've got a tremendous problem because people stop going to church when they stop believing the Bible. And I think what we see with this reduction is, if you look at the the cohorts or the generational cohorts, this collapse is a direct consequence of what the people were taught in the 50s and 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about Seminex being a victory for the Battle of the Bible and that the LCMS won that. But it was too late, because we'd catechized all those people who had children through the 80s and 90s in a way that told them the Bible was not the truth. So they believed it, and they stopped having children, and then their kids stopped going to church.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go into a lot of congregations, the children of the boomers are absent. And we need to have a hard conversation about why that is. What caused the children of that generation to say, I don't need church, or they were catechized that a contemporary service was the same thing. Well, you just seeded the ground and watered it so that they could go to the mega church next door that had a better smoke machine and better singers.
Mm-hmm. What do you think some of the things that were being taught during that time period? What do you think some of the key things that led to this disinterest in kind of serious theology or certainly Christendom?
I think root and branch of all of this is that the Synod, unfortunately, accepted the lie that Genesis 1:28 is an old word for an old world, and that it doesn't apply to us. So I think that...
Be fruitful and multiply.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So, recently I heard a very senior teacher in the church say that we make Christians through Matthew 28 mechanisms, and that Genesis 1:28 does not apply to us.
So he actually said both. He said, focus on this on Matthew 28 at the expense of Genesis 1:28.
So I wouldn't say at the expense, but to de-emphasize it to the point, well, if that's what you're teaching people, then they're going to say, well, that's exactly what the culture teaches, right? Is I should only have 2 children because that's the best way to clothe them, give them nice shoes, and make sure that they've got braces so that their teeth are straight.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and by the way, we want to go to Cabo once a year.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they did. Mm-hmm. So the LCMS, the theology started to align with the culture. And this teaching then coincides with the adoption of with birth control, becomes an accepted norm. The church stops teaching against birth control. It doesn't regard it as a sin.
Mm-hmm.
It simply says it's adiaphora, and that this is a decision for a husband and wife to make that doesn't involve God. Well, that's contrary to Scripture. So once you've started at that point, then it's little wonder that you are going to have a decline in membership. Because first and foremost, the best way to make Christians is to make Christians, right? Because you are bringing them to be baptized. Not all of them are going to stay in the faith. We accept that. But you've got a much better chance of someone remaining in the faith and running the good race until they have a Christian death if they are born into the church and are steadily participating in every aspect from start to finish, than if it's the other way around. We're trying to recruit people from outside the church. And so that, I think that became one of the focuses, which is an error, is to say it's more important to reach people outside the church. And in a sense, you see this very locally. So a lot of congregations stop believing that church is for Christians, right? The focus is not on supporting our brothers and sisters. It is on the faraway people. We want to find new Christians. So a lot of churches adopted programs and shifted their emphasis not on preaching and teaching to the believers, but devoting more resources to outsiders than insiders. So I think we lost a lot of Bible teaching in that respect. And then you combine it with the culture's adoption of things like evolution. So now all those higher critical things that, Jonah wasn't really swallowed by a great fish. Mary wasn't really a virgin. Jesus didn't really feed 25,000 plus people, when you multiply the men by the families. The world isn't really a young earth. It's millions of years older, and we can just accept that there was theistic evolution. So you combine all those products, and you have now catechized a people to not believe what Scripture says. Well, therefore, they're not going to do scriptural things. And so we have that consequence.
Yeah. And I mean, the more that, so I'm just thinking of someone that's, let's say they're in high school and then they're going through college, the more Christianity just kind of meshes with culture. At some point you say, okay, well, what do I really want to do on Sunday? Like, I can go to the Y, I can go to Lifetime Fitness, I can go out to the pub with friends. I can do all of these different things. I can get involved in different activist organizations. And in the end, we're doing kind of the same thing, except I don't have to give any money, and I don't have to wake up on Sunday morning, and I don't have to have someone kind of talking to me about morality, right? So at some point, if you become so similar, it's like, well, why go to church? Like, I can find everything that the church is giving to me. I can find it, and it's probably done better in other ways. Like, I think we were talking last night about, if the whole purpose of the church is just community, right? It's like, well, I've got a lot of other places that I can find really good community, and like, I don't necessarily need the church for that. Now, if the church is built off of a very distinct type of community that is very biblically based and theologically driven and forms kids and relationships in a way that no one else is doing, at that point, you just have a competitive advantage, which isn't the main goal. But you can see that when you stop to do that, you don't even have a competitive advantage anymore. Your voice is just lost. Yeah,
exactly. So if you convert your church into a place that says, we're about relationship and community, so hence a lot of churches change their names to such and such community church. And the outreach is, this is a place where you can make friends, and you will find, we'll look after you, and we'll make you feel better about everything. This is where you'll find true connections. Again, you'll see a lot of the times the word authentic crops up, right? We're going to give you an authentic Christianity, authentic relationships, and we're going to show you how to connect with Jesus in a relational way. So hence, a lot of the contemporary praise songs are about Jesus as your bearded boyfriend. You're loving him, and it's all this weird love language. Well, that's very cultural as well, because that's what the music is teaching the children as well. How many songs are about love? Country music, rap, pop rock, you name it. They're teaching much the same thing.
Yeah.
In Denver, we see this. The people who go to church have to be very committed, because the level of competition is intense. Do I want to go to church for a 9:00 divine service if I could be skiing in Breckenridge? Right? I've got a mountain cabin or a lake cabin. Wouldn't it be nicer to leave on Friday after school with the kids and go and have a relaxing weekend at the lake house? After all, we've got a mortgage. We've got to make this thing work. So we should use the asset that we've bought. In the summer, well, wouldn't it be better to go mountain biking? Wouldn't it be better to hike Colorado's amazing trails? So there are actually churches in Denver that have services during the week, specifically catering, marketing themselves to, you don't have to come to church on Sunday. You go and do your leisure activities. Make sure that you recreate 100%, and then we'll just fill in the God gap on Tuesday night. And we're going to make it fun. It's not going to be a drag. We're not going to have this liturgy and guys standing up there in weird clothing and chanting and doing those things. So this is very attractive to the people.
And tell me if this is true numerically. I've got a hunch it is. You probably know the numbers better, but it seems like churches that run that route, they might actually have like a first generation boom, because people say, that sounds good. Like Tuesday afternoon, I've got nothing going on. Like, that's perfect.
Yeah.
So, but then they do that. But then the key is that long-term effect, right? So if you're raising your kids in that kind of atmosphere where your kids are being taught your sports, our recreation, all of these other fun things, that's really what our family's about. And by the way, we like to sprinkle a little bit of, God over here in this kind of corner. If that's what you're raised in, what's the odds that when you graduate college, you're going to say, hey, that's something that's really important? right? You're not. You're
Yeah.
going to say all these other things are important. And if I don't know, if I've got a time a couple times a year, like, yeah, I'll go to church, I'll throw that in. And of course, then that never happens. And then you have a whole generation that is, disenfranchised from the church.
No, it's exactly right. And you mentioned the sports. And I know that there's a push on the missional side to say that we must be hospitable to kids who are playing league sports where there's a lot of travel. Coming from South Africa, the American sports focus for kids is insane, right? You drive past the ball fields on a Wednesday night at 9:00, and there are middle school aged kids who are still out playing in the field. They should be home getting ready for bed. And then it's practice on the Wednesday and then practice on the other days. And then they're traveling away for a long time. And the pastors are saying, well, don't criticize the parents and tell them that it's wrong to keep their kids out of church. We'll accommodate them and we'll have services on other days of the week, or we'll specifically cater to them. So Johnny and Susie, don't worry about coming to catechism class on Wednesday because we know that you've got baseball or volleyball or whatever. We'll just help you. Well, you're just communicating to the parents as well as the children that church is the least important thing in their lives, right? But what do they get in church? They're supposed to be getting taught the truth so that they can apply it in their lives and live the gospel in a way that produces fruits where they can go to work and say, this grace that I've received is so amazing that I've got to pay it back. Not to win salvation, but because now we have an obligation to do something that returns the gift and helps other people to receive exactly the same thing. But that's not what we're doing. We're saying you can compartmentalize your faith and your Christian activities and just make it part of your overall routine. So church becomes optional and it's going to fit into where you want to fit into your family's schedule. Whereas it should be the opposite way, right? The parents should be insistent, you are going to church, you are going to get catechized, we are going to do these things together. This is the center of our life. And, in our congregation, we've got someone who moved to be close to the church.
That's happening more and more. We're hearing a lot of reports of that.
So those are amazing things to see. It's not always possible to live near the church, and this is another factor we've seen is if you just go and do an anecdotal observation and you plot the addresses for the members of your church, they are driving very long distances, right? I love using the example of St. John's in Racine. So that congregation builds that church in 3 months from foundations to opening the doors for worship. 3 months. Not by an outside contractor, by the people of the church who lived all around that building. So they had the skills to build that building. And you've seen St. John's in Racine. It's a complicated structure, right? It's got vaulted ceilings. It's an impressive building. And this is what the people did because they understood what they needed. They wanted that church to help them confess. And they wanted a space wherein the teaching would be reverent and edifying. So that's why the reason that they do that.
Yeah, understanding that the history of sacrifice, right? That is, I mean, it really is a necessary part of the expression of the Christian faith.
Right.
In that, at my vicarage congregation, a lot of that's a beautiful sanctuary in Terre Haute, Indiana, Emmanuel. So very, very historic building. And most of that was funded because a lady who was widowed sold her house, moved into a condo, and gave all the money from the proceeds of selling her house to the building of that sanctuary.
Amazing, right?
There was somebody else who they had a big Asian immigration population that was part of their church, and they said that it was like a dozen of these ladies that after their kids started attending school, the ladies would pick up a job, and they gave 100% of that money to the church, right? Because that still makes sense for them coming as an immigrant, like those kind of sacrificial type ways of supporting the Christian community and the Christian church. Those things are more natural. to where here in America, I don't know what the numbers are. You probably know exactly, but if you can get 2% out of your families, like you're doing pretty good as a church,
Yeah. We've got a huge problem with giving. There's no question. You just do a histogram of every congregation's giving. And I would challenge the leadership in each congregation to do this, is actually parcel it out into buckets. What percentage is giving the top 10%, and then break it down. And pretty much across the board, you might have 5 families holding up each congregation, and then everyone else is maybe contributing the equivalent of a couple of Starbucks orders a month.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people doing absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
This is not unusual. Life works like this, right? Some people have got more to give, some people have got less to give. But it seems very extreme in our churches compared with what you see in the secular life, that the giving seems to be underpowered relative to what goes on.
Mm-hmm.
So another way I like to look at it anecdotally is, if you go to a church on a Sunday, I look at the parking lot. What is the age of the cars? What is the condition of the cars? And then you find out, well, the church is really struggling and they can't afford to pay the pastor. Well, why is there a $100,000 truck outside?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying people shouldn't have the right to have a $100,000 truck. But if you've got a couple of those types of vehicles in the parking lot, you shouldn't have a pastor who's struggling to feed his family.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got our priorities wrong. And it has just become, I think, accepted that pastors should be poor. Let's help them be poor. And we will continue to live our lives the way we want to.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the article, are there any other, I think you had a graph. You want to pull that up, Bennett? If I remember right, you had a graph kind of looking forward to the future.
Right.
Let's see if we can, do you want to scroll down a little bit? As we're scrolling, if there's anything else you want to highlight, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so let's stop there. Thanks, Bennett. So if you have a look at that active pastors below the last dark gray bar.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2023, we had 5,574 pastors compared with 5,323 in 2000.
Wow.
So that's a 5% increase. But attendees per pastor has crashed 50%. We're down to 94 per pastor versus 186.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an untenable situation. Something's going to have to change there. Part of that is going to be we're having a wave of retirements from the boomers.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a very large cohort of boomer pastors. But what I'm not seeing is the ability of those congregations to take a new man from seminary.
Mm-hmm.
So, my advice to seminarian, you'd better have a second career lined up.
Mm.
Maybe you should, before you go to seminary, have some sort of a qualification that is going to earn you money as a backup. Because you may have a very strong desire to serve in the ministry, but the ministry may not have a strong desire to pay you what you're supposed to be paid.
Mm-hmm.
In an ideal world, every pastor should be completely paid by his congregation at a level commensurate with his abilities and the size of his family. And we're not doing that. So for these young guys, if you're looking out there and saying there's a huge oversupply of pastors and an undersupply of congregations that can afford me, what do I do? Well, at this point in time, the only easy answer is maybe you should have a plumbing trade in the background. Maybe you should be an accountant. Maybe you should know how to edit books. You need some sort of supplementary income because you don't want to drag your family into a situation, especially if you're a young man with a new wife and young kids. That is going to place so much stress on them that it's going to threaten the marriage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think we're seeing that in many circumstances, is that we're overstressing the marriages of these guys, and making their jobs even more difficult than it is having to deal with some of us people in the pews who are not exactly the most pleasant people to deal with, right?
I think we were talking last night about an example of, like a young family, maybe they have their first kid, young couple have their first kid maybe towards the end of the seminary, right? Then they get sent to a rural congregation in Iowa where they're at the poverty line. Now the wife is removed from family, from friends. She's in a community where there's not much to do that young people would like to do. The people around them are farming, so they're interested in that, but you're not farming, right? So what do you do? Like, you don't even really have like a coffee shop that she can go to, or people of her age that she can meet. So she feels alienated. And then you were giving examples of, and there's a couple of them, right, where something comes in along the lines of, hey, you got to stop flushing the toilet so much because the water bill has gotten really high, right? So if that's the type of situation, that's going to add a ton of stress on the marriage and on the family, and that's a vulnerable time in a marriage. And so, yeah, you've got to find a way to remedy that.
You do, and if you have a look at the seminaries now, God be praised, we have got a lot of guys who are not having children at the end of their seminary stint. They're exiting with 2 or 3 children, which is fantastic. But that means they need to be paid more. You don't want to get your situation where the pastor's kids are coming to church with the shoes flapping and the teeth are all over the place when they're ending middle school. They can eat apples through a tennis racket because they can't afford braces. These are things we need to be concerned about. And you do see a lot of pastors are having to supplement. Now, that will take away from their ability to serve in the ministry, right? If you're working outside the church, you cannot devote as much time as you probably should be to your core tasks, which are preaching. So there's a lot of preparation needed there, teaching the people, and then doing all the other routine things, the shut-in visits, dealing with family counseling dramas and marriage breakdowns and all of those things. So, those aspects of life crowd in. So we tell our guys, have large families. This is a blessing. This is what God wants you to do. But by the way, we're going to make it so hard for you to have these children, and you must just deal with it. That is an untenable situation that we need to address.
Yeah.
So somewhere in the next 20 years, that level of pastors is going to come down dramatically, whether we like it or not.
Yeah. Other graphs on here that we should go through?
So what I also did there is, if we scroll down, I just did, and I'm not a demographer. So we do have an LCMS demographer in Lyman Stone who says these numbers are way off.
Oh, yeah.
And that's fine. I put out my assumptions for everyone.
But to give you a little bit of credit here, you are also very good with numbers. You've got your professional life deals with numbers a lot, right?
Yeah, I deal with numbers all day, every day.
Yeah.
And
at a high level.
And I'm dealing with financial issues, and I'm also doing a lot of forecasting and projection. And so the Lord has given me those gifts and put me in places where I've been able to apply those in real time and in reality. So these are not just theoretical exercises for me, because my salary is dependent on whether I get these things wrong or right.
Yeah.
All right. So,
because what's your profession, if you just want to?
So I work for a trade association, and it's kind of a glorified dating service where we match institutional investors with publicly traded companies, and we do that through conferences primarily. So that's the core task. But in order to do that, you've got to understand very big market trends that have completely, shifted 3 or 4 times just in the 13 and a half years that I've been working at this particular institution. But in the 40-year history since this institution was started that I work at, there has been upheaval after upheaval after upheaval. So the ability to run an organization through those macro market changes and still be successful, you have to have a little bit of confidence that you know how to project and run the numbers and draw an audience. So that's what I'm drawing on there. It's not just thumb sucking.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm not a demographer.
Yeah.
But so if we scroll down, what I tried to do is build in a whole lot of assumptions that said what happens to our overall attendance if we do a couple of things. First of all, is that anecdotally, we are seeing an increase in the birth rate, especially for the confessionals. And it seems to be rising pretty dramatically, to the point that we may even be exceeding the Mormon birth rate.
Oh, wow.
So
what would those numbers look like?
So you're probably heading towards 3 children, a TFR, total fertility rate, of 3.0, somewhere in that range.
Okay, yeah.
Which is a change from where we were falling below 2.
Wow.
So we're starting to exceed the replacement rate.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that overall compression in membership over 25 years, even if your total fertility rate increases substantially, it's going to take a long time before you can get back to stability.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's just the mathematics of loss, right? So if you lose 50% of an investment, in order to get back to par, you need 100% gain.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that mathematics of loss that we're dealing with. So this particular chart that you're seeing on screen is just a straightforward attempt to model what happens if nothing changes.
Jeez, that's not
right.
For those that aren't looking and are just listening on our podcast platforms, the graph does not look good.
No. Essentially, so if you mouse over the graph, it will actually provide a tooltip that shows you what the actual numbers are. So in 2000, we go from 1,109 or 1,109,000 average weekly attendees to 2023, we're down to the 522, and that's the reported number.
Mm-hmm.
So effectively, by 2050, functionally, we cease to be a congregate or a church body.
160,000 is that number.
We're down to 160,000 people. By 2100, really, we just completely cease to exist.
18,500.
So, and interestingly enough, that 18,500 is about what the total membership of the Zelk is in Germany presently.
What's the Zelk?
The German Confessional Lutheran Synod.
Okay.
That we're in fellowship with.
Okay.
So in that, Germany's population is about 65 million. There are 18,000 identifiable confessional Lutherans, but I think church attendance on a weekly basis probably 500.
Wow. Okay.
So it is.
So we've seen this in other areas.
Absolutely. And you see this all over the Western world. Lutheran Church Canada its collapse is undergoing an even more extreme version than we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's reasonable to assume that the Lutheran Church Canada is going to cease to exist in its present form within a short period. And I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of a breakaway where the confessional congregations just quit LCC and join the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
Mm-hmm.
The total thing is about the size of one of the LCMS districts. So if you cut out some of the churches, maybe it falls to 30, 40,000.
Mm-hmm.
But, and then Lutheran Church Canada is undergoing this insane civil war where you've got people firing shots at other people and creating confusion within their own people over matters that are not germane to what is needed to teach the people. So part of the Lutheran Church Canada is more allied with the political majority zeitgeist in the Liberal government in Ottawa than it is with what a biblical teaching would be on so many things.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're starting to take public shots. It's not a healthy way to grow your church body or sustain it.
Yeah.
So that's something to keep an eye on, which I think is a type of analog on a more accelerated and smaller scale than what we're seeing with the LCMS.
Mm-hmm.
So this chart that we're looking at now is if we have TFR-driven growth, so total fertility rate increases to...
As it's projecting, it seems like it's moving in that direction.
As it seems to be moving.
Okay.
Then we could return to 1 million average weekly worshippers by 2131, so 106 years' time.
Mm-hmm.
And it just illustrates how difficult this problem is. We're not good at bringing in outsiders, converting them into the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, right? We're just, the number of converts is relatively tiny. And our retention rates are not that great either.
Mm-hmm.
And there are very distinct differences between the confessional cohort and the more missional and liberal cohort. The confessionals are having children at a much higher rate than the liberals are.
Mm.
And this is borne out across all the other church bodies because the liberals are more aligned with what is going on in the culture, which teaches that children are a burden, not a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have more discretionary income if you have less children.
Mm.
So this is what people adopt. But at the same time, it does bear saying that where we failed as a synod is that we don't care about the cultural and economic issues. So the pressure on the youngsters, their cost of living is far higher than what it was for their grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
So their grandparents could give a higher percentage of income because it wasn't being chewed up by ridiculous housing prices, all these hidden taxes with higher energy costs, carbon taxes, you name it. We are being sliced and diced at an extreme level. And then in a lot of cases, the jobs were exported. So through the Rust Belt, where were we telling the government, even at the very local level, you're not going to export this factory to China. And we are going to do everything we can to stop you from strip mining our community.
Mm.
But we were silent on this because we regard the United States as a free economic zone where people are free to do whatever they want. If they want to ship our jobs to China or India or Vietnam, well, that's just what the market does. And we can import labor to undercut your children so that these imported guys will work at 70 cents on the dollar and you're out of work.
Mm.
And it's just tough.
Mm-hmm.
Is it any surprise then that we see that the opioid crisis and the drug overdose crisis is most concentrated in those communities where the factories got exported, so the labor, those jobs got lost, and all the knock-on effects that you get from those factories. And then we substituted their labor with cheaper labor from abroad.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what generates this despair. And if you're in those communities and the church says, we love you, well, do you love me?
Mm.
Right? So it's not just about, well, Jesus loves you very much. Jesus is also concerned that we're able to take care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The Bible is clear that work is a good thing. And we want to have more work. We want to have labor that is highly valued, that is productive, because that's what brings the money into the coffers.
Mm-hmm.
And we sanctify mammon from the rest of the world in order to do good things, to better proclaim the gospel and bring it to our people, serve them better with great pastors, and then to be able to go out into the rest of the world and proclaim the gospel there.
Mm.
But if you're exporting that income, then don't be surprised that you're suffering these losses.
Mm-hmm. What's the road forward look like? Do we have some hope?
Yeah, I mean, there's always hope, right?
Yeah. And by road forward too, like what ideas can help with that road forward? So one, like what could the road forward look like, and then what do we need to be doing now in order to support that?
The most important thing is that we've got to be honest about the cause of the loss of membership and attendance, which has to be rooted in a rejection of scriptural authority and the truth of what the Bible says. So if we are saying that Genesis 1:28, be fruitful and multiply, only applies to animals and Old Testament people, then we are falsely teaching the people. So, but it is encouraging. That is definitely turning around.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be law-driven in teaching that contraception is a grave sin.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a personal choice. We are commanded to have children. It is the Lord God who opens and closes the womb. So let's live like that. But at the same time, then we, in these congregations, have got to make sure that we can support these young families. And it's not about offering them welfare. It's about having stable communities that they can live in, raise their children in, and hopefully the grandparents are nearby. We've got to address this thing where we've dispersed the families and we tell them, well, I live in Massachusetts, but don't worry, my child, you go and live in Arizona. It makes no difference. It
Mm-hmm.
makes a huge difference.
Yes, it does, yeah.
St. John's Racine, again, it's just a great example. They all lived within walking distance of church. And the grandparents could see the grandchildren after school on a daily basis. So, that sense of family and community and the church all goes together.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bit of social pressure, which is good, which is that, we noticed our neighbor didn't walk to church with us on Sunday. I wonder what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a problem? Are they ill? Is there perhaps a marriage problem to address? So you lose all those connections.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're so dispersed and people are driving in from long distances. So, I think just we've got to recover our teaching on the blessing of the family. And just,
in a multi-generational aspect of like the having of children, and then the large support system that continues to pour into that kind of primary focus of what the family's doing, of having children and raising them in the faith.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been too accepting that there's nothing deleterious about having families atomized in search of career choices. And it's a little rich for us to speak about because we left our family in South Africa to come here,
mm-hmm.
and we're kind of starting over. But where you're in this place and you've got family, we should be encouraging people, stay where you are, stay with your family, stay with your congregation, build what you've got locally, because that's the best chance you've got. But
mm-hmm.
if you atomize it, even if your birth rate increases to where we would want it to be, doesn't necessarily mean they're all going to be in the place where they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
You go chasing jobs. There are not a lot of great Lutheran options if you move to different states.
Mm-hmm.
And now that the synod is split along this missional versus confessional thing, you can't even go to your local LCMS church without first doing major research to find out if your kids are going to be propagandized and decatechized.
Mm.
So, if you go on holiday, it's not just a straightforward thing of, okay, we're going to stop here overnight and then we'll go to church on Sunday and then continue our journey, because that church may be a complete train wreck.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've lost the local community, but we've also lost our national community, which is the whole purpose of walking together in fellowship, which is what a synod should be,
mm-hmm.
is that I can have confidence that if my child has to move away for work or for whatever, they can go into a church where they preach, teach, and sing from the same hymnal that we do. And that there aren't these competitions for their attention about, well, we think this is a better way of being a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
We've got all these things that we developed for centuries. What's wrong with them? They're from Scripture.
Yeah.
And this is why I don't understand the deviation from the liturgy.
Mm-hmm. What else do you see moving forward? What are some other things that we can do and address?
And this is where I think Lutheran Institute of Theology is so important,
mm-hmm.
in that I'm an anti-lectionary guy at the moment, because I think a lectionary is for a people who are very well versed in Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to go back to basics. We can't assume that an Old Testament reading, an epistle reading, and a gospel reading, and the hymn of the day are sufficient. I think a lot of people don't understand that the two prior readings are actually dependent on what the gospel reading is for the day.
Mm-hmm.
So I spoke to Pastor Wolfmuller last week by happenstance, and he mentioned that he started sort of a private podcast for his members that they can listen to on the way to church that says, this is why we're doing these readings today, and we're singing this hymn, and this is what I want you to listen for in the sermon.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. I would even like to see that put into bulletins, maybe even an announcement before the service which says, hey folks, this is why this Old Testament reading is here today. And when you go home, if you look in the back of the bulletin, here's a suggested set of readings that complement this to give you the proper context. Because I think what happens with the lectionary is it gets very siloed, and people don't understand the bridging between each week's readings. They're only coming to church once a week, and they don't make these connections. So it all becomes very compartmentalized. And then if they're doing the 1 year lectionary, obviously very favored in our situation, and I understand the reasons for it, do people become complacent and just switch off? So this is where lit can probably just play a tremendous role in helping the congregation have a more formal structure in learning how to read the Bible, learning which Bibles to trust, and then how to apply that knowledge so that they're not taking away nonsense from what they're reading.
Yeah. Kuntz's course is very good on that. Just kind of an intro to where did the Bible come from? How is it structured? How do these things interplay? And what are some major themes that are going to run through? And he kind of walks through that. But that alone would help someone be able to understand, because to your point, do people even know that something like Isaiah is a prophetic book that is waiting for a prophetic answer, waiting for a completion to these things? And the answer is probably not. So when they get a reading from Isaiah, which is sometimes very complex and confusing language, right? What are they thinking when this is being read, right? If they don't understand the context or what it is, that's going to be very difficult. Now, something we've done this year, which I like. So we've done at this church historically, there's been more sermon series, has been more the approach. And this year, what we did was we bridged the two. So we're doing the 1 year lectionary. But what we do, and it's very simple, right? So if you want to use the 1 year lectionary, this makes all the sense in the world to me. We've packaged it as if they're sermon series, right? So just to say, like, okay, we're going through the season of Epiphany. So we've got like a title for, so everyone can understand this is what I forget what it was, Light of the World or something of that sort, right? So this is what we're talking about. And then all of the titles align so that they kind of all rhyme. And the season of Epiphany works that way. Like it's the revealing of different aspects of Jesus to the world. And as you go through, like you've got the baptism, you've got, the first miracle, and you've got all these different components. So if you can just articulate it in that way, then when people come in, they just have some semblance of, this is what we've been talking about. This is what we're talking about. Right. So I have some form of expectation that I can apply once these readings are given before the sermon begins to try to explain this. But those are just kind of simple packaging things to where you're not changing it, but you are helping people understand what's going on. Because I remember as a kid coming in, and it was always a surprise. Like, I have no idea what we're talking about today. And I don't think I ever really connected that what we're doing today is connected to last week, with the exception of big, obvious services.
Right. And even connected to the seasons of the church, right?
Exactly.
The church,
and that's all the seasons, the series are for us right now. It's the Easter season, it's the Epiphany season, it's Lent, it's Advent.
And coming out of evangelicalism and fundamentalism specifically, the church calendar was kind of mind-blowing because it's completely rejected in the evangelical churches and the Baptist churches. They're very soft. It makes a very light appearance now and again. So there's the idea of Christmas. There's the idea of Easter. But then with Easter, the focus is going to be on the kids getting eggs in the the church grounds after the service.
Our local Baptist church, they had Easter services on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday.
With the goal of handing out goodies to attract people. Am I right?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah. So, the church year is just such a fundamental thing that I think cradle Lutherans kind of take for granted. And it's not a deep-seated understanding of these readings are connected with this season in the church year. And this is why we're doing this. And there's a progression. I mean, everything is very logically laid out. But if you don't have a deep scriptural knowledge, then it is just going to be jumbled and it's going to be very siloed and probably not helpful to a lot of people. So I'm sure you as a preacher, you stand and you're looking at, what do they call them? Like the stunned fish just staring at you. You can see in the eyes whether they're actually tracking with what you're saying, if they're not sleeping.
Yeah.
And it's like a thread that's reaching each person. It's a very fine silken thread that can be so easily broken. So how better to thicken that thread of the ideas that are needing to be communicated to the people so that they're not just jumping in and out of the sermon, sometimes paying attention, sometimes not paying attention.
It does take a lot of, I think, rhetorical training. And, I hope they're doing that at the seminaries, but I think you need to have a low floor and high ceiling, right? So you need to be able to rhetorically scoop down, even just sometimes in the language you use, and catch people that are not going to understand. But then you have to bring them pretty high, right?
Yeah.
And I think lots of times we can fall into one or the other. And kind of the stereotypes would be maybe a more missional approach is just, we're going to stay down here where the language that everyone knows. And then the problem is you don't really get a lot of theological depth there. So you're not really cultivating people in a very deep way. They might get some good tidbits, but they're not going to create a framework or a worldview or a way of understanding things through a Christian lens. On the other side, if you use really technical language when you're exploring these things, you're going to lose a lot of people. So you're just over there. So you have to, and I'm not saying I'm an expert in it by talking about this, but you do have to just find a way of scooping people up, but then bringing them up really high and having them kind of wrestle with some really kind of theological and philosophical points, and even cultural points, and that takes a lot of wrestling. And to your point, I preach without a manuscript, so I can read people's eyes continually, and that's continual data points. And I can tell when I'm doing one or the other, right? I can tell when I'm either too low or too high, because different people will, our smarter people will fade out if I'm a little bit too low. And then, our newer members are going to fade out if I'm only too high. So you can get a good read of people just by reading their eyes.
Yeah. And that's a great skill, which I do hope that they're teaching at the seminaries. I think a lot of it is just, you have to be apt to teach and preach. And I think this goes to, I think we can be reasonably critical that we are not taking our best people in at the seminaries. And one of the consequences is that they don't have that skill, which is to be able to know where the audience is at that particular point in the sermon. And then if people are falling asleep or they're becoming restless, do you have the rhetorical ability to shift gears and take it to another level? Or are you stuck on that pre-prepared manuscript that you're reading from if you haven't memorized it, or you don't have the ability to articulate that preaching extemporaneously?
Because sometimes it's as simple as a line. Sometimes I'll say something and I'll go, that was a little philosophical. Right. Like the language I used, I jumped into the King James Version type speaking or something like that. And then I'll just, I'll rephrase it in a way that uses simpler language. Or usually it's the opposite. If I'm doing it right, I'll use a simpler phrase and then I'll follow it right up with a more technical phrase. Right. So that they can connect that these are the same things. You know what one is, so that helps you understand the second phrase. And now we're ready to kind of carry on.
Yeah. And that's exactly what is needed, because you're also preaching to the bell curve, right? So you have got people who have got different linguistic abilities, different processing abilities, different philosophical backgrounds, just in terms of how they've been educated. So they're going to listen in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I see some preachers use a lot of jokes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what the people are going to remember from the sermon? The joke, not the point of what you were trying to get across.
So you know what's interesting with that? I'll notice I'll notice two things. One, I'm not a big joke guy, but sometimes they'll come naturally or off the cuff at a certain point, right? So that's by no means my go-to. So you'll get really good engagement there, but I'll notice you'll get more of a lag in like 2 minutes later. Right. So it's almost like you've activated the endorphin system, and now they're waiting for the next endorphin system kick. And as I'm explaining XYZ, like there's not a big endorphin kick there.
Yeah.
But I've also noticed that I would completely push back against the notion that a lighter sermon is easier to follow, because we've got. I mean, we'll get like 700 on a weekend. Right. So we've got a pretty big spectrum of people, age range, background in Christianity. And without a doubt, some of the more serious sermons, like my Monday, Thursday one was very, very, it was probably the deepest that I've gone on something, right? Because I was really trying to explain our understanding of the Lord's Supper and weaving it through the Passover and the showbread. So I was taking some pretty deeper concepts, and it was one of the better followed sermons. And I know that for a fact because I can read people's eyes.
Right.
I can tell I've got a pretty good read. And I know when there's sermons that, I'm like, I lost them at, 0.2 and, we lagged for a good 3-4 minutes, and I've got to recognize that. But there's no question that people have a good capacity of following deeper things if they know that, one, you're serious, two, you've taken the time to try to figure out how to articulate this in a way that they're going to understand. But three, when people know there's something with meat or meaning that's being talked about, like, they're interested. They really are.
Yeah, and I think this is where that phrase, the bigotry of low expectations, comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
I think that our pastors have maybe been taught that you've got to pitch it at a very low level.
Mm-hmm.
But as you know, with children, you actually get a high response if you challenge them. The more you challenge the kids, the more they will rise to it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to have different abilities to respond to that. But I've never come across a situation where if you don't start pushing the kids, they don't respond well to that. They like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's going to be the same in the congregation. They don't want to be treated as dummies. They've got the ability. We've got a very highly educated base to work with. So that's a blessing. You're not starting from the lowest common denominator where people know absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They've all got pretty high levels of education to speak of. Most people have at least finished high school.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got the ability to wrestle with what you're saying and comprehend it. So I would say, if anything, our pastor should be pitching higher and faster.
Yeah, I agree.
And the people will appreciate that because they don't want to be infantilized. They don't want the soft Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
They want the real Jesus. They want the absolute truth. Don't sugarcoat things. Tell them exactly what it is. And in my experience, people really respond to that. And I think that's where the evangelical churches perhaps have a benefit, is because they'll do this expository preaching with long sermon series, and they'll literally go verse by verse through the whole book of John.
Mm-hmm.
And that's helpful because then the people are getting this context. So as long as they're in church every Sunday, they are going to get the full book of John within the sermon. Because how many people stay for Bible study?
Mm-hmm.
Not that many.
Not many, yeah.
Right. So it's a pretty, once you refine it down, the number of people who are still in church for Bible study after the divine service is a minority.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to catch them in the service.
Mm-hmm.
That is your primary chance. So we have to be better at preaching. That's 80% of the pastor's work, I think, is a reasonable way of looking at it. And then the teaching and everything else that comes out of it. But if the preaching is not done skillfully, and I think this goes back to, we can be honest with ourselves that part of the reason that we've seen this dramatic decline in attendance is because our preaching has not been particularly effective.
Mm-hmm.
In a crude sense, the pastors are the salesmen for the gospel, to use a business analogy. So if my business depends on salesmen delivering customers, and I've got 5,500 salesmen, but my customer base has dropped by half, there's a problem with the sales staff.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to look at what is the fundamental problem that is causing them to not be able to preach the gospel in a way that the people hear. It invigorates their faith. It causes them to love going to the rail. It causes them to want to baptize their children and for the whole family to stay in the faith. So something has gone wrong. And I'm not the guy to know exactly what that is, but I think we've got the skills within the synod to go to the seminaries and say, we should do a longitudinal study to find out what has gone on that has caused this. Because it's very easy to say, oh, it's a demographic issue. Demographics is related to it. But if we believe in the power of the gospel, then we should not be suffering this decline, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a reasonable, if very harsh criticism to make, is that there's some fundamental problem that is going on, that has gone on in the pulpits.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're starting to see it being reversed, but we need somehow to go back and be able to put our finger on a couple of things and say, this is the issue. And one of the things that I would see is there's this obsession with law and gospel,
Mm-hmm.
where the audience has been catechized to believe that if I don't hear 51% gospel and 49% law, the pastor has failed.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the pastor gets criticized because I left the service feeling that I must do things.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this focus, the attention of the audience is on the hermeneutic, not on the content.
Mm-hmm.
So the critique of the pastor is not, are you teaching me, but are you delivering what CFW Walther apparently wanted you to deliver, which is this structured format of preaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Pastor Kuntz has spoken about this as well, is that, he wants to address a preaching deficit that we're seeing, which in many ways was inculcated by the seminaries to preach in a specific way. So, the very reduced, compacted sermons, there's sort of it's almost a boast that, these Baptists, they preach for 40 or 50 minutes, but we're done in 20 minutes. So you can go and get your RB sandwich before the Baptists crowd the place out.
That's good. Let's take a quick break.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Bennett in his Nebraska Huskers cap says, we are back.
They're a very faithful tribe, aren't they?
They are faithful. Through thick and thin. What was your Nebraska joke? The N is for knowledge.
That is not untrue. But
yeah.
I heard they've got a football team or something, right?
Maybe. Not important as their hockey team. They did at one point.
They did it one, yeah.
Yeah. Played Michigan in the 97 National Championship Rose Bowl, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, one of our pastors, Pastor Bauer, is a Nebraska man, and you can see it's very painful not to be able to boast about the victories.
Yeah, we had that for like 13 years for Michigan. I'm a Michigan guy.
Yeah. Okay.
And so the last 4 years we beat Ohio State. And every year I'd say the exact same joke because it's always the Saturday before Advent. So we switch everything to blue. Like, you notice we've switched to blue, and of course that's because Michigan beat Ohio State. I get less laughs every year, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to keep doing it. I don't care if I'm the only one laughing.
All reasonable.
Yeah. All right. So we were talking about how COVID had some effects in some of these demographical shifts. I mean, it propelled things like a decade ahead of schedule, right?
Yeah. And I think what we saw with COVID is it was really appalling how the church responded.
Mm-hmm.
So our pastors were really good on this. I was too cautious at the start of it.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that was I had a conference in Switzerland that I had to cancel and lost 240,000 Swiss francs on. Chunk of change. And that we canceled that event in February. But already by December, I was discussing with my board the likelihood that it seemed that something big was developing in China and watching developments in Italy. And, I could see that this was rolling in and it just had that impact. So in my mind, I had this has got to be serious, but it was very clear by Easter of 2020 that it was fake.
So in other words, you were able to catch it when it gets kind of mandatorily reported right off the bat.
Right.
And then if you went back 24 hours later, the numbers were completely shifted.
They had completely shifted. And it was every day the numbers were being changed. So what this told me is either the collection system is so poor that it's unreliable, or the data is being manufactured, or the standards for how to classify things are changing so dramatically that you cannot rely on the numbers. But either way, none of the explanations give you results that you can say there is something significant. And what really broke it open for me was there was a hunting accident in the Yampa Valley, which is out near Steamboat. A guy was accidentally shot and killed during a hunting outing. And he was classified as a COVID death. And we all know examples of this. The guy, a roofer, falls off the roof and dies. But because he had COVID, he was classified as dying from COVID. Then they started to massage it as dying with COVID. But the point is they used this to inflate COVID infections, and it became a testing epidemic, a testing pandemic that didn't bear any relation to what had happened. So the synod as a whole just curls up in the fetal position and says, we will do whatever we want to do, or whatever the government wants us to do, which is to shut down and not have services. But we are commanded that we must worship corporately. You don't get to, in our theology and with our doctrines, you don't get to worship alone at home. And then they say, well, yeah, we acknowledge that the Lord's Supper is really important. But how about we just do remote consecration and remote communion? So you go and get your box of crackers from the kitchen, and if you've got some wine, otherwise water is fine, and you can just.
Did they really say that water would be fine?
I don't have a specific example, but a lot of people wouldn't have wine at home. So what were they using? Grape juice.
So there's no control over it, right? There's no way to make sure that this is even being done with any kind of semblance of normalcy. Correct.
So they're taking communion in their bed, in their PJs, while they're watching the service online. And where in our doctrines is remote consecration a thing? It's absolutely not a thing. So as the CTCR rightly said, to conduct virtual communion is a form of witchcraft. Right?
That's what they said.
That's what they said.
I like that, yeah.
And they're absolutely correct. Because you're changing the form and the substance and the nature of this thing to be a type of magic. There's a reason that we consecrate the elements the way we do. And we do it right there and then.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have a very high view of the Lord's Supper. This is the pinnacle of the divine service. You are coming to receive gifts of life and salvation. This has salvific effects. And when you're coming to the rail together, you are making a confession that as we all kneel together to receive the Lord's body and blood, we are of one mind. We are in fellowship because we believe the same things.
Mm-hmm.
And we had pastors. The example I gave in the story I wrote about this is a local area pastor was doing ding-dong ditch communion. So someone in our congregation was too afraid to come to church to receive, well, not just to worship, but to receive the Lord's Supper. And our pastor said, I'm not going to do it differently. Come to church. If you want to be separated and safe, you can even go to the choir loft, and you can have the Lord's Supper there. Anyway, they contacted another pastor who then dropped off the consecrated elements on their doorstep, rang the doorbell, ran off to his car, and then they kind of conducted it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
These are terrible aberrations that are heretical.
Mm-hmm.
And it was going on all over the synod, examples like this, and attempts to justify why remote consecration and virtual communion are legitimate.
How would they articulate that?
It's actually unfathomable to me. I don't understand the argument that for a pastor to consecrate the elements in your bedroom via the television is not the same thing as doing it in church, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just fundamental. So what happened at the seminaries that a guy is graduated and sent out to the people and has this mind that the Lord's Supper can be conducted remotely.
Mm-hmm.
And the Synod tried to address it, the CCCR article, and they put a stop to it, and it seemed to tamp down. But there's still guys out there who are saying that there's nothing wrong with this. Nobody got disciplined. And this is what I really don't understand, is the people who are continuing to do it. There is no discipline. The Synod can get very excited about other things, but this thing that we so fundamentally hold together, that we desire the greatest reverence for, there is no discipline from the circuit visitor, the district president, or the Synod to stop these practices, which are aberrant and heretical. So if we've got witchcraft in the Synod, as CTCR says, then either we need to banish the witches or we've got to re-educate them. But we kind of just, we're so obsessed with being nice that we weren't prepared to thrash these guys, and they deserve a thrashing. Any pastor who's conducting remote communion should not be a pastor. They either need to go back and be re-educated, or they should rather go to a different vocation. But they are not pastors at that point. They have ceased to be pastors, in the same way that if you have divorced your wife, you should, for the sake of the weakest in the congregation, please leave the ministry. And that's another huge area of weakness, is that we as a Synod have a very low view of marriage, which contributes to the problems we've got with the demographics, in that there are men who have been married multiple times who continue to be in the pulpit and are held in the same esteem, the same regard. That's wrong. And what that signals to the people is that we don't really believe Scripture. We will massage it for the circumstances to make it work. Because the most important thing is comity, that we're nice to each other, and we don't want to get into arguments and fights. But doctrine does divide, and we should be willing to fight on those issues.
Yeah, I was just about to ask what the motivation is. So it sounds like the motivation is this understanding of just kind of getting along, not ruffling feathers. Do you see other motivations there for being loose on those areas?
I think part of it is, I heard a Minneapolis pastor on the podcast with Tim Ullman justifying why he did remote consecration for a member who was dying, and the family really wanted communion, but he couldn't go to the hospital and do it. I think that was the circumstance, and I'm happy to be corrected. But anyway, the upshot is that remote communion was conducted, and the justification was that it pleased the members. Well, it would also please some members if you don't say anything about their children cohabiting. Right? And there are many examples that lots of pastors talk about where they come under a huge amount of pressure if there is an especially dominant member of the congregation who contributes a lot of money and their children have shacked up. Nobody wants to ruffle the feathers because you'll lose that source of income. But that's not the standard. In those cases, we have to lay down the law and we have to be harsh. It is not Christian to allow these people to continue in their sin. It is not Christian to conduct remote communion. You're then engaged in some other religion, but it is not the one true Christian religion that the Lutheran Church has been able to articulate so well.
Let me ask this because I think it kind of builds off that. So have you seen the recent Pew research that came out? Okay. I'm kind of interested in your thoughts, kind of broadly speaking, but even just, it does seem like there's certain resurgences in younger people, particularly younger men, right? And it seems like those resurgences are based on churches or those that articulate with conviction what they believe, right? So it seems like this notion of kind of pleasing first and then talking theology second is not actually working on the younger generations, right? It's actually the inverse. But you might have looked at the numbers a little bit more. So if you have any thoughts there.
I think we've got to be careful that the Pew sample is probably not very accurate. So the margin of error is maybe 20%.
Okay.
So, in some of those instances, because who are they actually asking the question of? So I do want to be careful. But that said, even if you're really generous and you say there's a 20% margin of error, there is a significant portion of the synod, which then means distributed across every congregation, where you will have members who even come to church every Sunday, go to every Bible study, and are engaged in every activity in the congregation, who believe that homosexual marriage is a good thing, who believe that abortion is acceptable, not just in limited cases, and they've bought the lie about rape and incest. We want to make exceptions. So we're prepared to punish an innocent child for the crime of one of the parents. Again, that's not scriptural. That's not. We should be heavily antagonistic to any deference to abortion. When I go to the rail, I don't want to have doubts that the person next to me has got a permissive view of abortion, because that's not what we teach. We are there to protect life to the end. And it goes to, there's a recent case in Denver where our pastor got called to help out in a situation where the hospital in Denver was telling an elderly woman that they would give her a pill and she could kill herself. So it's not just in Canada.
Is that legal in Colorado?
Apparently.
Okay.
And the doctors were, well, we're not in the room when it happens. Right. So there's a bit of hand washing going on there. But this is the stage that we're at, where we've got this low view of life in the womb, and we've got this low view of life at the end of life, because you shouldn't suffer. And yet our faith is perfected in suffering. is what we're taught. Our faith is not perfected in how rich we are, how healthy we are, how successful we are. So this is where the Pentecostals have bled into our denomination as well as the dispensationalists. And our people have imbibed this from the competing religions as well as the culture. And it just bleeds in everywhere. So it really is concerning. There is a significant minority in every congregation that will hold views that are contrary to Scripture. And that's part of that process that we do have to address. But as you say, the youngsters seem to have picked this up. They really are strongly rejecting what their parents and their grandparents have been very lax on. So there's a strong correlation in those views with the age of the respondent. And the younger we get, which is really encouraging, the more militant they are. And I love militancy in young people. Martin Luther was 34 when he started to take it to the Pope. There's a reason that young people have got zeal. And we shouldn't be bridling it. We should just be harnessing it. We want those youngsters with that tremendous zeal, that huge energy, because they are a driving force. And if we work with them and we harness them, they can do tremendous good for the church. But, the worst thing is to feminize it, which I think has happened in a lot of senses, which is to say, that view's a little on the edge. Maybe you should tone it down and, don't have so much zeal. No, let's cultivate that. Let's cultivate a healthy, godly zeal for the truth, founded in Scripture, that people can see these men and women, that they're making a declaration which prior generations have not. And we see this, my age group, so I'm 56. If you go and look at all the synod statistics in most congregations, there's a huge gap for my age group. For whatever reason, we are missing in a really significant statistical way. There's a Gen X cohort that is not there, but that's being recovered. So, and we see this practically, and what I'm seeing is the confessional churches, which have a very strong publicly stated subscription to Scripture and the confessions, where they're uncompromising, are very attractive to these youngsters. They're looking for authenticity, not in relationships. They want to know what God requires of them. And they love that it is being communicated to them in a straightforward way, and that Scripture just tells it as it is. Right? The wisdom there is amazing, and then it gets reinforced by the confessions. And they love the liturgy. So, just the past couple of weeks at Trinity in Denver, we have confirmed a number of adult men who have come into the faith very recently and are taking up the learning and want to be participants in the church and to do things. It's incredibly healthy.
Yeah. What brought you into Lutheranism? What's the background there? And is that connected with you coming here from South Africa?
Yeah, very much so. It's ultimately, I think God brought us to the United States in order to make us Lutherans, so that we could be Christians, join the one true faith. So I grew up Baptist, which was more the Spurgeon variety, so very connected to the British Baptist Church. It was a real shock to come to the United States and encounter American Baptist churches.
What's the difference there?
It's all over the board.
Here in America?
Here in America.
Okay.
So you can go to a Baptist church where they'll recite the creed, and then you'll go to another Baptist church where there's no creed. Or you'll go to a social gospel Baptist church. So it was very disorienting for us that this name Baptist meant nothing. Mm-hmm. So in the same way, I'm sure it's disorienting for Lutherans to go to different churches and find out, well, this is not the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I grew up Baptist. My wife came to faith, oddly enough, in a Word of Faith church, Rhema, out of Oklahoma, which had an outpost in Johannesburg. The Lord works in mysterious ways and brought her to faith in that church. We weren't particularly strong Christians of any stripe while in South Africa. Then we had our...
Is that normal in South Africa?
No, there's a strong religious component which is dominated by your ethnicity. So Afrikaners are the largest white ethnicity in South Africa, and nearly all of them belong to the Dutch Reformed Church. And then you have what are called the Doppers, which is another significant slice. So the Afrikaners were very cohesive in that sense. And then the English, we actually have very few Catholics in South Africa. It's quite an unusual situation. Mm-hmm. But because of the colonial connection, the Church of England did do a lot of work. And so the Anglican Church is fairly well represented, but very political. Mm-hmm. So they allied their teaching to a social justice component, largely because of apartheid, and where the church was most active in the eastern part of the country, in the Eastern Cape. And then the black churches, the largest church in South Africa is actually the Zion Christian Church. Okay. Which was initially the leadership there was taught by American missionaries, but they withdrew halfway. The job only got half done. So it's this weird mix of Christianity with traditional African animist beliefs. Mm-hmm. But you will see the ZCC folks will wear a uniform. So typically it's khaki with a little green felt sash with a silver star on it. Mm-hmm. And that's how you know. The men will often wear caps. The ladies will wear sort of a turban. And they also wear shoes or sandals made out of car tires. So they will cut up old scrap tires and make sandals out of it. That's kind of part of the uniform.
Interesting.
Very interesting to see. But the charismatic churches have made tremendous inroads all over Africa with the prosperity gospel. Mm-hmm. Is, for whatever reason, extremely attractive. And Rhema was part of that, where they brought in this name it and claim it prosperity teaching, and the people really went for it, which is the idea that if you were poor, it was a reflection of your lack of faith. So they promoted faith in faith. Mm-hmm. So the strength of your internalized commitment to faith was then demonstrated by your wealth. So people will go out of their way to demonstrate their wealth with luxury goods. So they'll go into debt to drive fancy cars so that when you see them in the parking lot, you will think, wow, this guy's been blessed by God. Mm-hmm. And then it goes from that modestly high level of Rhema down to these ridiculous iterations that have manifested where people are drinking alcohol in excessive amounts for the Lord's Supper. You bring your preferred bottle of vodka or whiskey or whatever.
Really?
And the goal is to get slammed.
So that's like exactly what Paul speaks about in Corinthians.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, you just got these terrible aberrations. So the Christian culture has really collapsed in South Africa. There isn't a cohesive culture. Mm-hmm. The Lutherans made very few inroads. They set up 2 missions. I used to play rugby against 2 schools, Wartburg and Hermannsburg. So nice German names carried over those settlements. The kids spoke German. They learned in German. And they tried to have mission stations, very unsuccessful. Just for whatever reason, made no penetration with the Zulus.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more successful in Southwest Africa, which was a German colony.
Mm-hmm.
So Lutheranism is a lot more widespread, but very aligned with what the ELCA teaches.
Oh, okay.
So there's a very small confessional component of Lutherans in South Africa. We never encountered them, not once. And generally that's because they were Germans and they lived together. They went to school together. They all went to Deutsche Schule, and they didn't really mix with the rest of the population. And their churches were for them.
Okay.
So we never encountered Lutheranism in any way.
So then you moved to the U.S.
Moved to the U.S. We won green cards in the lottery, so that's how we got here.
Okay.
We got out as quickly as possible.
What was your motivation?
The motivation was simple. So at that time, the farm invasions in Zimbabwe were taking place, racially motivated, and the rumblings were starting in South Africa as well. And they had what they call black economic empowerment, which is that you could not grow a business if you did not give up, at that point, 26% of the equity and cash flow to people assigned by the government. So I dealt with an attempted corruption issue where we had bought a business that was operating a conference in South Africa, and I got called by the highest ranking bureaucrat in the Ministry of Mines to say, you've got a problem because this business has to have black equity ownership, but I will solve your problem if you give me 20% of the business. So we had to report that to the authorities because of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. But it's that example where I knew that my children and their children and their children's children were not going to be able to function in an independent, race-neutral society. So they spoke about the Rainbow Nation, and that is a fig leaf. It is still a beautiful country with a beautiful people. But it's been destroyed.
Is it getting better in any ways, or like over the last 20, 30 years? Are they turning things around, or are they just continuing down that same path?
No. And the tragedy is it takes a long time to build up the capital stock of a country. And South Africa didn't have the resources that the United States has got. So what took 300 years to create, with all its problems, has been undone in 30 years.
So it happens quick.
It happens extremely quickly. There are entire train lines that no longer run, that have been stripped. The level of corruption is unreal. If a simple example is, have a look at the newspaper from, say, 1980, with the number of publicly traded companies on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and then compare it with the same listing of publicly traded companies today, and it is a fraction of what it used to be.
And most of that's because of corruption.
With that level of corruption, there's not a reason to invest. Your capital is at risk. So why would you invest in a country where your capital is going to be confiscated or compromised? And you saw this in the mining sector particularly. During Congo's war, it got more foreign direct investment in mining during the Civil War than South Africa did in peacetime after apartheid. Because these are the decisions that investors are going to make. And that was because South Africa changed the mineral rights regime. It used to be that you owned everything under the soil, on the land that you owned. The government nationalized that. And let's say you discover gold under your house. You don't own that. So that was a fundamental change that stripped away the property rights. And the only way that you could mine that is you have to get a license from the government, which is then contingent on the proportion of skin colors that you've got in ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's going to drive people away.
Mm-hmm.
Another issue that really concerned me was the reversal of onus, where it changed from a presumption of innocence to a presumption of guilt for certain crimes. So, for example, let's say that you used a firearm in a defensive situation. You're automatically presumed guilty, and you are going to have to prove your innocence.
Oh, wow.
So that is a fundamental change.
Mm-hmm. And it can be used as a weapon.
It is absolutely used as a weapon. And you do not want to go to prison in South Africa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is not a pleasant place to be.
Mm-hmm.
So those were all push factors. We had tried to go to Australia. It's extremely difficult to get to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United Kingdom, unless you've got a professional degree. So if you're a doctor or a lawyer, an engineer, or you've got a good trade, those countries will take you. And it's ironic because they're strip mining the very skills that those countries need.
Mm-hmm.
They're strip mining them for themselves. So, for example, you can get citizenship in Canada. If you're a doctor, they'll take you. As soon as you've graduated in South Africa, you can go and work as a doctor in Canada, but you have to do 5 years in Moose Pasture, Saskatchewan. Right? So it's a bit of a hard slog.
Yeah.
But it's preferable to being a doctor in South Africa, where once you finished your training, you were going to be sent to a location where you didn't know that you were going to be safe.
So they direct where you go.
They direct.
So once again, the centralized control that kind of weeds into all these areas.
Correct. And that, the idea was, well, if the state is contributing to your medical education, then the state has the right to extract value from you. So that's a form of slavery, because your labor is now being coerced to go and do something that you don't necessarily want to do. And the result has been the collapse of the healthcare system, which used to be pretty good. And there's now an attempt to move to a single payer system where there will be no private insurance and everything will have to go through the state hospital. The state hospitals are appalling. If you're going to go to a hospital in a state hospital in South Africa, your family is going to have to bring your food and the sheets for the bed.
Oh, wow.
And you better not have anything of value because it's going to be stolen.
And there's going to be no other options.
That is what they're pushing for. There will be no other options.
So then those that have the option to leave will find the option to leave, which will leave the country even more devastated than before.
Which has happened. So and then what they did is to try and fill that gap is the African National Congress with the Communist Party, which it's in alliance with the labor unions, what they call the Tripartite Alliance, has a fraternal relationship with Cuba. This is how they describe it.
Okay.
Because Cuba was heavily involved in subverting governments in Africa as kind of the vanguard of Russia, the Soviet Union. So to reward Cuba for having supported the Tripartite Alliance, South Africa imported doctors from Cuba and pays the Cuban government for their services. Well, how do you think it goes if you place a Spanish-speaking doctor in a tribal rural area where they don't speak Spanish, let alone English or Afrikaans? You're just going to bury your mistake. So you've got all these discontinuities that are a problem. And then with that is an early form of DEI, which we're seeing in the United States now, where white kids are heavily discriminated against in terms of getting into university and getting employment opportunities. And the ability to start a business is very constrained. So those are push factors where I literally just put it out on a spreadsheet and I said, this is not the future we want for the kids. So as hard as it is to abandon your parents, for the sake of the kids, we had to do it.
Yeah, what a breakdown, right, of just top-down bad decisions. And then you can see the effects of it at the lower level, where you're looking at this and you're saying, okay, our kids are going to have to deal with this, and there's going to be long-term consequences, maybe even physical harm. So the options before us are we have to leave our motherland and go elsewhere, be separate from some family, or we stay here and there's a good chance we burn in the process.
Yeah. You know, and the basic rule is in Africa, when they tell you that you're going to get killed, and this is now being openly promoted by Julius Malema from the freedom fighters, the economic freedom fighters.
Okay.
Where you've probably heard them chanting, kill the boer, kill the farmer. And this is a racially antagonistic war cry.
And that's going on right now, you're saying?
That has been going on for years, and it's been taken to the Constitutional Court to say that this is hate speech. And nothing has been done about it. And he continues to be free to say things like, well, I'm not going to back down from saying we're going to kill the whites, you know, and laughing about how if you touch the white, this uproar goes up, and saying things like, well, we're not going to kill the whites yet. Well, in Africa, you take those threats seriously because there are plenty of examples in history. In Uganda, in Kenya, the Indians were driven out through racial animosity. The whites were attacked through the Mau Mau uprising. The intertribal violence is really significant and is always under the surface. So my wife's father's business was looted during tribal rioting in 2021 to the point that it no longer exists.
Wow.
So there's an example.
In 2021?
In 2021. They had big riots that kicked off because the Zulu tribe was displeased that its president, Jacob Zuma, had been charged with corruption and had been sent to jail. So they kicked off a riot. So you've got this tribal underlay, which is a huge problem and has not been well addressed. Because the ANC has been dominated by the Xhosas. So you've got this ethnic friction below the surface.
We saw that in Ethiopia as well. We've done some work over there, and they just had their whole civil war, which was the first time they've had a civil war in quite some time. And talking with some of the people there, right? I mean, it's just the tribal differences, right? They've just stuck there, right? And they're kind of regionalized to some degree. And the one group that had power for a long time lost an election, and then I think that region ended up electing the previous prime minister. I don't know what the title is, right? President, to be the head of their tribe, and then he started working against that, and a civil war breaks out, right? And there's all these types of stories. But it is interesting to have these kind of deep-seated animosity that goes back from generations to generations, and it just seems very difficult to kind of pull those weeds out and to turn a fresh leaf.
Yeah, and I think when we look at it from a Western perspective, we don't understand those dynamics. You have got clan-level conflicts. So, you know, each family will belong to a specific clan, which is then part of a tribe. And you will have inter-clan conflicts that go back 1,000 years, because we remember when your guys living on that hill came and attacked us. And then we retaliated. And this stuff is going on all the time. Now, it's not as pronounced as it used to be, but it's still a fact of life. And then you layer on that the racial dynamics and how these get stoked and manipulated. It's not helpful. It's not a place you want to raise children in.
So what's your take on both, let's say, Lutheran/Christian culture here in the U.S. and even just the way the U.S. is kind of operating. I don't mean necessarily on like a high political level, but even just as you kind of watch the cultural, the community type of expressions coming from South Africa. What's your kind of view on that?
What's fascinating is everything we consumed in terms of media in South Africa was very American oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So the films we watched, the television we watched. So I could identify any American city skyline just based on having consumed that media, whereas an American doesn't know what the Johannesburg skyline looks like.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Maybe they do after watching District 9.
Yeah.
But that's about the limit of it. So you've got this sense of familiarity,
mm-hmm.
but there's a huge cultural gulf still. So, I think part of what is a benefit to me is that we're always outsiders.
Mm-hmm.
So we have an anthropological approach, really, because we're kind of always sitting on the outside looking in. We're not within the system. We're not within the American culture. We're not within the Lutheran Church. We're not part of any ethnos within the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So we're always going to be outsiders. The kids are very assimilated.
Yep.
But Juanita and I are outsiders and will remain outsiders our whole lives.
Mm-hmm.
And we've accepted that. That's, it's not a criticism.
But it gives you a unique perspective.
It does. So we can see things that insiders don't necessarily appreciate, or they just take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
So oddly enough, we lived in St. Louis for a few years,
mm-hmm.
and our son went to an ELC at one of the local LCMS congregations, but it made no connection for us.
Mm-hmm.
So we were still in a fundamentalist church in St. Louis, and it was really only I was looking after the children's ministries at that church,
mm-hmm.
and I started asking the kids and then some of the adults, why did Jesus die for you? And they could not answer it beyond saying, because he's a nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a real appreciation that sins had to be atoned for and God's wrath had to be propitiated.
Mm.
And I was starting to really grapple with this stuff. And more from a Reformed perspective. But in researching, looking for materials for this children's Sunday school, I start surfacing Lutheran materials. And I say to the elders, well, these materials look really good, but they preach infant baptism.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't use them. And then I said, well, why not? What is it about the infant baptism that's wrong? So you start reading scripture. There's no age of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
It teaches that there is regeneration,
mm-hmm.
and that it applies to everyone from infants. So when our daughter in 2011, shortly before we moved to Denver, I got a job offer in Denver. She wanted to be baptized at this fundamentalist church. And the pastor said to her, well, you need to have a confession or a testimonial. And I was like, she's 11 years old. She has no testimonial. So can she just read from scripture what baptism is? And to their credit, they were fine with that.
Yeah.
But it was instructive because the guy who got baptized before her, an adult, it was his third one.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew that this baptism was going to take because he had been reading his Bible for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, that nice contrast of it was by his power that the baptism had to work as opposed to the scripture's power.
Yeah. So for you, it was first kind of wrestling with the atonement, kind of understanding the purpose of the crucifixion. Then it was moving to infant baptism. And then at what point did the dominoes kind of fall and you ended up joining the Lutheran Church?
It wasn't an instant. And I think I'd been struggling with some of these things even as a child because I'd resisted getting baptized. I wasn't baptized until I was an adult because it seemed absurd to me that I could choose God. which is really how it's framed, right? So the teaching in many senses is that the Old Testament is normative in that you must perform things in order to satisfy God, and then he will love you. So you must love God with your whole heart through deeds and works. And that was kind of the articulation and the expression of that. Made no sense. The dispensationalism, I was never able to come to terms with, right? It just made no sense to me because they were just teaching that Jesus was like the Energizer Bunny. So he was going to come back the second time, and then over this millennium, he would lose power steadily until Satan beat him. And then he's going to come back again, and this time it's going to be victorious. But that's not in Scripture. So, you read all this stuff, and it made absolutely no sense. So I was having extreme problems with that. I was having huge problems with, more as an adult, that the idea that Jews and Israel had a separate form of salvation apart from ours. But there's one faith, there's one baptism, there's one Lord. There can't be two forms of salvation. And then when you looked at these expressions, well, where's their temple? Where are the sacrifices being made? So it's nonsense, right? Just logically.
Yeah. If they were needed, if that's what defined Israel for their entire history, at least via the Old Testament, then like how can they persist in not doing those things today?
Exactly. Yeah. Where is the continuity? And if we are to pray for Jerusalem and, in that sense, we're performing something that says we agree that Israel is carved out separately. Well, this Israel bears no resemblance to what goes on in the Old Testament, except when they're idolaters, right? Yeah. So those problems. And then oddly enough, the tag to Lutheranism came through the White Horse Inn. So we had an issue in our fundamentalist congregation where there was a homosexual worship leader. And he justified that he was completely forgiven, radical grace, through the teachings of the White Horse Inn. So that kind of introduced me to the idea of monergism, which I started reading up more on. Loved that, because now it suddenly made sense. God is doing the work to me. I'm not bringing anything to him. Fantastic. But then this idea that everything is forgiven and that once you receive this grace, nothing else matters. As if Jesus did not say, go and sin no more. But through that, so the White Horse Inn had Rod Rosenblatt, who gave that Lutheran connection, but he never really defended the Lutheran position. Mike Horton, who's the White Horse principal, is a Calvinist. He had the dominant voice. So we were really steered to become Reformed. So at that point, we left St. Louis, and I said to the family, look, we're either going to be Reformed or Lutheran. So we went to a White Horse Inn friendly church in Denver. It was terrible. It's just absolutely shocking. And it happened to be that our neighbors over the road where we were renting were at a local LCMS church, Holy Cross in Highlands Ranch. And they said, well, why don't you come with us? And that was it. So we went in. Pastor Skelton there catechized us about 8 weeks, came to the house every Thursday and, just helped us to understand everything. I had no problem with the sacraments. I don't know why a lot of evangelicals say that they struggle with infant baptism. I had no problem with it.
Yeah.
The Lord's Supper, I think I had a little bit of difficulty kind of understanding what the real presence means. Is it caponetic? am I eating Jesus's elbow and my neighbor's getting a finger?
Yeah.
So that childish response. But it all came together very simply.
Mm-hmm.
And then understanding justification properly. But the problem with the white horse inn is it's the turnstile out of the circus. And you'd better not hang around there. You've got to keep moving, or you're going to stay in the circus. And it's a different thing. It's very seductive for evangelicals to hear that you are completely forgiven and that you don't have to work for your salvation, which is true, but it gives itself over to an antinomian attitude.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the first interactions we had with a Lutheran at this church was he gave us the Heidelberg Disputation.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a very antinomian outlook and a very passive view of works and a confusion of pietism with piety, which you still see being articulated in the Synod to this day, where people will be very critical, for example, of Luther Classical College is promoting Christian piety. But this is being presented by the antagonists as pietism, as if it's works salvation.
Mm-hmm.
But we do need to encourage our people to be pious.
Yeah, the form of the Christian life.
Correct. You don't get to keep going to the strip club because you're saved.
Mm-hmm.
There is a response there. There is a go and sin no more component. Doesn't mean we stop sinning and that we're no longer capable of sin and grievous sin, but there's a remedy for that.
Mm-hmm.
So confession, absolution, very powerful. Because in the evangelical churches, they will absolutely eschew the idea that you, by the command and in the stead of the Lord Jesus Christ, can forgive sins.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, there it is laid out. The office of the keys is very clear. What you bind will be bound, and what you release will be release.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just glorious. And then the ability to commune the way Lutherans do is amazing. Because again, your evangelical churches, it's extremely personal. So they'll pass a plate around, and then you're going to have your little piece of bread, your loaf of white bread, and then you're going to have a little shot glass. And the admonition from the pastors is always, make sure that you're in the right state with God before you take communion. Well, I don't want to take communion then because I know what a sinner is.
Mm-hmm.
It's me.
Mm-hmm. So that confession absolution as a precursor of, I know that I have repented. I know that I'm not unrepentant. I'm not saying, yes, please forgive me for these, but for these ones, please don't address these. Yeah. And then you can say, I am, in fact, in a good standing with God, and therefore I can go take this in good conscience.
Because it's not my power, it's God's power.
Yeah.
And that's just made clear throughout the divine service. Is what really unlocked it for me was, and I think I heard this through Pastor Wolfmueller and Pastor Geglein when he was still in the ministry, through Table Talk Radio.
Mm-hmm.
They explained it that in the evangelical church, you come to God to serve Him with your praise and worship and your gift. Bible's pretty clear. God doesn't need anything that we have.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to serve us. So when they explained this inversion, that in the divine service, God is coming down to us. He's present. He's on the altar. And then He's put in my mouth. That just unlocked everything. That was like the final piece of the puzzle that said, this is absolutely true. Simple, very straightforward.
Well, I hope that God can reverse things in South Africa. But I am glad that He's brought you here to Lutheranism through the road that He's taken you down. And I appreciate everything you're doing with Ad Crucem. And for all of those that are listening, you can check out the link to the website in our description below. But we've got to get you to the airport. I think we could probably talk another hour, but we got to get you to the airport. So, Tim Wood, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Pastor. Thanks for the hospitality. Bennett, thank you for your skills, and really appreciate the time here.
Yeah. Well, cheers.
Thank you. Cheers. Yep.